Hello everyone, my dear followers. Welcome to chapter 11 of this fanfic that has been with us on the channel for so long. If you haven't seen the previous installments, you can find them in a playlist on the channel. Without further ado, enjoy.
Once the shinobi from Tsunade had determined that Naruto was the winner, Genma stepped forward and waited a few minutes for the crowd to calm down. Seeing as the adrenaline from the fight had passed, Genma cleared his throat before addressing the crowd. There will now be a period of an hour that the fighters can use to recover before we go into the semi-final round. There were a few groans from the arena, but then the audience quickly used the intermission to rush to find foods and drinks. Genma glanced to his left where Naruto was still standing there stoically. He wasn't even showing fatigue. Genma shrugged before walking off the field, leaving Naruto and Suisei still standing there silently. Naruto moved towards one of the trees and sat down at the base, making use of the shade provided by the vegetation on the tree. Suisei took the time to fly into the tree and get out of the sunlight which her black feathers absorbed. Naruto closed his eyes and allowed himself to rest against the tree before the next fight. Gaara from the booth stared down at Naruto with intrigue in his eyes, but the auburn-haired boy remained in the booth, keeping his distance like he had all of his life. He had seen how the tournament would play out, and Naruto knew that he had 2 more fights to win just to see how far he had come. Now Naruto was not expecting to beat a full-fledged Jounin-level shinobi, but the remaining genin would provide him a challenge he desperately needed. Dare he say craved. Taking a deep breath, Naruto calmed himself because neither of those fights were now but in an hour's time. His first fight was against Yuna, who proved to be something novel, at least to Naruto she was. Her ability to meld her 2 genetically inherited skills into something new gave Naruto an opportunity to test himself. Then there was Gaara, a shinobi thought to be nothing than the epitome of a mindless killing machine, or as he saw it, a prime example of a shinobi. The red head from Tsunade touted an impressive defensive combination that could provide a problem to a lesser shinobi, where not even luck could save them. Then there was the off chance he would willingly give his body to the Biju residing inside of his body. Yet what really caught the eye of the son of the yellow flash was the sand inside of Gaara's gourd. With his Sharingan active, Naruto was able to pick up something from it but would need a better chance to inspect it, a fight. Naruto stopped himself there because looking up at the video board it would seem that it was determined that he and Yuna would fight before that. No matter how much he believed in himself, Naruto would not risk overlooking an opponent with the potential to do harm such as Yuna. She had the water release and poison release which he could counter with the fire and wind releases respectively. The acid release though gave Naruto pause as he wondered if his fire would be hot enough to evaporate the liquid-based ninjutsu. Letting out a small sigh, Naruto ran his hand through his raven-colored locks. He always hated question marks. Meanwhile, up in the Kage booth, the 5 village leaders were going over the profiles of the other combatants and marking down what they believed to be weak and strong points to pass down to the judges. Even with them being the strongest shinobi, their opinion alone still did not make a Chunin. It also took the opinion of judges from the lesser countries. The Kazekage, who had just passed his ballot, took this moment to speak. Now we have one from Konoha, Iwa, and Suna each. The Kazekage seemed pleased with the outcome since both his village and his ally could possibly take the final match, only increasing their business. Mei, hearing her peer's words, frowned slightly before letting a small smile come across her face as she took the bright side of things. It was true that Kiri didn't have a combatant in the final 3, but she had 2 shinobi who had made it plenty far in the tournament, each showcasing outstanding qualities that would garner them a promotion. Inoki let a small gnomish grin come across his wrinkled face as he looked at the Raikage, obviously getting ready to do some classic, rubbing your face in it. Well, Raikage Dano, who do you think will come out victorious at the end? Inoki asked cheekily, knowing just how annoyed he was at not having any shinobi in the contest. The Raikage's hand clenched slightly and his brow started to twitch dangerously as Inoki took his shots at him, which he usually did. Call me petty, but I don't care all that much who wins the damn tournament now that my shinobi have been eliminated. I'm only here to keep eyes on potential enemies and the ceremony tomorrow. The Raikage admitted without even a hint of shame as he looked at Naruto sitting patiently in the field. That is the one I need to be watching. The winner of this next match won't stand a chance against Gaara. One, they will be tired from doing battle beforehand, and second, Gaara has been groomed to become the perfect shinobi. He won't lose. The fourth wind shadow stated, confidently ignoring the fact that Gaara had already almost lost it once. Now, Kazekage-dano, do I need to remind you that aside from the minor injuries that Chojuro had gotten on Naruto, no one has really pushed him to show anything all that powerful. Minato added, in taking pride in his son's ability with seals and ninjutsu, knowing he had always been hiding things in the stands. I wonder how Nisan will deal with Unisan's acid release? That stuff is really nasty. Naomi muttered with a small frown, remembering how the green liquid had eaten through her shinobi sandal. Now she was sure that Yuna would be using that more now that she was only one fight from the finals. I am not sure, but if I had managed to dodge that attack instead of hoping my jutsu hit Haku first, then Naruto-kun wouldn't have to deal with a fresh Gaara. Narumi muttered with a frown as her shoulders slumped down in self-depreciation. The blonde looked up when she felt a hand resting on her shoulder. Don't worry about it, Narumi-chan, because there is nothing we can do about it now. All we can do is cheer on Naruto-kun and watch as he kicks some ass. Kushina finished with a small grin, getting matching grins from her two daughters, who nodded resolutely. With their resolve reaffirmed, the three family members readied themselves to cheer for their pick. Lee was looking down towards the stadium with a barely contained excitement, which was an expression mirrored by his mentor, Guy. Yash, I shall give my all in cheering on my fellow Leaf Shinobi. Lee shouted out, energetically ignoring the ashamed looks coming from Tenten and to a lesser degree Niji. Very good, Lee. Let your flames carry your comrade to a glorious victory, and I too shall lend my flames. Guy said with the traditional good guy pose, getting an approving and slightly frantic nod from his chibi. Kakashi looked over to Guy with a blank expression, something Guy noticed, but when he looked, Kakashi was already back to being aloof. Ignoring how Guy was cursing his supposed cool, hip attitude, Kakashi looked down back at the field where both Naruto and Yuna were standing. The copy Nin was watching both of them with the eyes of a hawk, but with even more intensity when it came to his sensei's son. He was definitely the most enigmatic shinobi the Leaf had in her service. Even more so than himself, Kakashi had to admit. Combat field. Yuna fidgeted slightly, not even getting into a combat stance even after Genma's permission to start. Naruto, who was curious as to why Yuna seemed so reserved, had not moved in any meaningful fashion either, simply choosing to wait for Yuna to get over whatever mental block that was plaguing her. The IWA Kunoichi glanced up to see Naruto looking at her curiously. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she glanced into Naruto's Sharingan eyes. Gaining the courage she needed, the diver helmet wearing Kunoichi spoke up. And Naruto-san, I know this might be a little startling and all, but I would like to. Naruto, who was now just as confused as the rest of the people in the arena, arched one of his eyebrows. He had absolutely no idea where this was going, but it had to be important if Yuna was going out of her way to make a point of it. Naruto was also left wondering why everyone always had to be so timid around him. Then again, Naruto did admit to himself that he enjoyed watching people scurry around him, something the Kyuubi apparently found funny, if the loud snort was any indication. You would like to what? Naruto asked, hoping to get the conversation going. Naruto felt something twist in his stomach when he saw the blush spread across the cheeks of his female opponent. Yuna, who saw the look Naruto was shooting her way, managed a weak smile as the heat in her cheeks only seemed to intensify. Taking a deep breath, Yuna looked back at Naruto with only a light dusting of pink on her cheeks. I'd like to get to know you better after this tournament. Yuna's request that started off quiet ended up being a small but sudden yell. The stadium was left deathly quiet as they looked down at the two shinobi who had seemed to forgotten about the Chunin exams altogether. Up in the Kage booth, Minato and Inoki were both looking down at the scene playing out with disbelief. The villages of Kanehagakure and Iwagakure were supposed to be the worst of enemies after Minato's feats, but yet here was an offer of a date. It was unbelievable. Naruto stared at Yuna with no emotion clear on his face, getting the Kunoichi, who just put herself out there to him, to become nervous. Naruto started to think on what Yuna was proposing, and he would admit that maybe he should accept said offer. After all, it couldn't hurt to partake in the date, but I don't see why not, Yuna. Naruto started getting a bright smile in return from his soon-to-be opponent. But you need to prove yourself to be a true Kunoichi in our fight, and then I'll say yes. Got that, Yuna-chan? Naruto ended with a teasing jab by accentuating the affectionate suffix often attached to a girl's name. Yuna's happy smile lasted a few more moments before giving way to an expression of extreme determination. Yuna didn't drop into a taijutsu stance, but she was ready to begin the fight. Naruto briefly wondered why she didn't wish to test him in hand-to-hand, but then again maybe it was because twilight was a looming reminder. The tomo of Naruto's Sharingan spun around lazily as he eyed Yuna ready for any sudden movements she might pull. Both fighters failed to notice that the stadium was still in a state of shock, and even those who knew Naruto were surprised that he agreed because he had shown very little in the way of interest towards the kunoichi of the Hidden Leaf. Though in honesty that was because a frightening amount of them were nothing more than love-sick puppies and fangirls. Something every talented shinobi absolutely loathed. Naruto watched as Yuna created 3 Mizu Bunshin to stand in front of her each with the expression of pure determination. A hail of shuriken flew through the open spaces between the clones, but each cluster was delayed after the one before. Naruto bobbed through the first cluster without any difficulty. The second came in a moment later, in which Naruto responded by slapping the stars away with his katana in a fluid motion. Doing to the same with the final barrage, Naruto glared down the Mizu Bunshin in front of him. Ducking the punch thrown by the water clone, Naruto drove the pommel of his katana through the clone's head. Watching as the clone dropped into a puddle of water, Naruto tightened his hand around the hilt of his katana, the charm from Narumi resting against the back of his hand. Spinning around, Naruto thrusted the edge of twilight straight through the heart of the second water clone, ignoring the splash of water that hit his face, sensing another clone running at him from behind. Trying to turn back, Naruto found himself slowed in the chakra-heavy water, and by the time he squared up with the clone, it had him in its embrace before locking into a water prison. Naruto's body then went up in a plume of smoke. Naruto moved out from behind the tree he was sitting in front of earlier with a blank expression in play as he regarded Yuna with stoicism. Seeing that her little ploy to use diversionary tactics failed to get past Naruto's discerning gaze, Yuna started to dip into her ninjutsu arsenal. Naruto gazed on as her cheeks started to puff out. Water release. Sticky water bullets. 3 bullets of water shot from Yuna's mouth, one on the left, one on the right, and another going down the center. Naruto realized that Yuna had created this formation to keep him funneled in the path of the centermost bullet of water. Naruto smirked at the clever but simple tactic. Seeing no other choice, Naruto slashed through the bullet that was trying to take his head off of his shoulders. The blade sunk into the bullet, but Naruto found he couldn't cleave through the glob of water. Naruto cursed quietly as he was forced to release his katana as the bullet collected the sword and stuck it to the far wall of the arena. The high viscosity of the bullet managed to cancel out the katana's cutting power, yet if Naruto had applied a small amount of wind chakra, the problem could have been avoided. Naruto caught the fist Yuna threw at him with no difficulty, but was forced to let go so that he could avoid the leg sweep from his opponent. Using the falling momentum gifted to him by gravity, Naruto attempted to drop a falling heel drop onto Yuna's right shoulder. Yuna used her forearms to block the attack as well as to flip Naruto over. Not panicking, Naruto gracefully fixed himself while in freefall. Naruto glanced down when he felt his vest being cut into by a sharp object over his gut. Thankfully, the chain mesh kept the kunai from cutting into the skin or worst provide an internal injury. Intent to kill, that is promising. Naruto mused loud enough for Yuna to hear the praise he was giving her. Lashing upwards, Naruto kicked Yuna's hand, clutching the kunai, sending it upwards following the trajectory of the kick. Yuna yelped in pain and gripped her hand, trying to stop the throbbing pain that originated in her hand. Crouching down in the middle of a spin, Naruto delivered a devastating elbow to Yuna's gut, causing the kunoichi to gasp in pain. Following his attack, Naruto rose back to a standing base, but Yuna was already bringing her helmet forth to bash against Naruto's head. Naruto blocked the helmet with both of his hands, but grimaced when he felt Yuna drive her knee into his stomach. His body moved naturally as he slouched forward, letting Yuna kick him dead in the chest, knocking him backwards. Naruto rolled to lessen the impact before springing back to his feet to keep Yuna from attacking him while he was prone. Naruto rubbed his chest. The taijutsu taught to him by Mihawk didn't make use of the Sharingan's ability to determine trajectory, so Naruto often stayed away from it, and that was why. Avoiding hits was always better than taking them and hoping you could get back up, because there was always the chance that he could possibly not be able to stand any longer. Inhaling, Naruto flashed through his hand signs, ending in the familiar tiger hand sign. Naruto's lungs started to burn. Fire release. Grand Fireball. A large compressed sphere of fire sped forward towards Yuna with intent to harm. Yuna, who was aware of the hand signs Naruto was using already, had countered by firing 2 water bullets at the sphere of fire. The resulting collision bathed the field in a steam. Naruto stood there as the steam swallowed him up, not bothering to avoid it since the seals on his clothing drastically lowered the effects of elemental damage or wear. Then the steam around Naruto started to swirl and gathered into one point on his palm. The air started to compress and swirl around on top of Naruto's palm to the point that the winds became visible. The steam soon was funneled out of the field and into the air, but before it could finish, Naruto aimed him palm and the sphere fired off into the field of mist. Just as the last signs of the steam cleared up, the arena watched as the sphere flung through the air and hit the unaware Yuna straight in the stomach, getting the kunoichi from Tsuchi no Kuni to cry out. The crowd gasped, seeing the kunoichi getting hit by such a fearsome attack, but then her body turned into a green liquid that splattered on the ground. Naruto guessed that it was an acid clone and waited for Yuna to reveal herself. Naruto ran to his left, getting the crowd's attention as they too were looking around for Konoha's demon's foe for this round. Just when the crowd was ready to pass it off as a futile movement, a drill of acid hit where Naruto's heels were just 2 paces ago. Naruto glanced over his shoulder, saw Yuna holding the hair hand sign. Water release. Violent water wave. Naruto hopped into a tree as the wave from Yuna pushed the liquid from the acid-based technique at force behind the watery wave, uprooted the tree, and washed it towards the stadium wall as the acid remains in the water started to eat through the bark of the tree. Creating a shadow clone, Naruto gave it a silent command before leaping off of the tree, sticking to the wall. Naruto watched as his Kage Bunshin started to glow. A moment later, the clone exploded, creating a large crater in the stadium field. The water soon flowed into the large hole containing the acid to that spot. Yuna glanced towards the hole that contained her wave of water-infused acid with a small frown before glancing up at Naruto, who had just released a larger shuriken. Thinking nothing of the larger equipment, Yuna shuffled to the side, making sure the projectile sailed harmlessly to the side. A plume of smoke caught Yuna's eye and her body tensed when the large shuriken changed into a copy of Naruto. The transformed shadow clone started to glow faintly, getting the kunoichi's eyes to widen. Yuna cursed, knowing what was going to happen but being unable to prevent it. The great clone explosion went off right next to Yuna, getting her body to propel outwards like a human projectile. Naruto dropped back onto the ground, looking on coldly at the spot that Yuna landed. The stoic Naruto cracked a small smile when he saw that Yuna was beginning to stir. It would have been a shame if she was finished by a medium-quality explosion like the one his shadow clone produced. Yuna now recovered enough from the jarring explosion to stand and glare defiantly at Naruto, obviously not wishing to lose to him. Her helmet was no more than a few pieces that were littered around her on the ground, leaving her black hair to flow with the slight breeze that had been blowing all throughout the day. Naruto glanced at Yuna in her entirety and shot her a small grin. You know, that helmet of yours really doesn't do you any justice. Why not show that pretty face of yours? Naruto complimented Yuna, enjoying the slight flush that came to her cheeks from his praise. Well, I'll keep that in mind for the date that I still have to win. Yuna replied with a small smile, seemingly not recognizing her own words. Naruto tilted his head to the side with a mock expression of befuddlement that, coupled with his Sharingan, gave it a very odd appearance. Blinking a few times, Naruto pursed his lips. So you do want a date then? Naruto asked, with his head tilting to the other side with a questioning expression on his face. Yet inwardly Naruto was grinning, since he loved playing mind games with his opponents, much like his sensei, Itachi. Naruto was glad that Yuna didn't use the word date before, because it gave him ammunition for his little game. Yuna's glared at Naruto even harder, but the amount of intimidation in the heated glare was cut in half by the blush that adorned her cheeks. Shut up and fight. Yuna growled, going through a complex series of signs faster than she was earlier. Naruto's cursed eyes took in the sight of a large, green dragon spinning around Yuna before glaring at him, much like its master was doing. This dragon, though, was different than the dragons used in the competition thus far. Unlike the dragons before that were more along the veins of a reptile, this dragon took more after an Eastern Hemisphere perspective of a dragon. Acid release. Fury of the Emerald Dragon. Then again, there is the downside of insulting your opponent. That, of course, is when their skills sharpen with their anger instead of becoming sloppy. Naruto groaned inwardly as he glanced at his surroundings. Seeing no way to be able to outrun the large acidic creature, Naruto started his own hand signs in a last-ditch effort to stop from being burnt by the acidic properties of Yuna's chakra. Holding the horse had signed Naruto begun to knead his chakra as the dragon lunged towards him. Fire release. Majestic flame destroyer. Naruto breathed out his chakra, which took the form of fire. The thin jet of fire branched out into a wall of fire that engulfed the dragon's body before it could tear into Naruto. Naruto was disappointed by the scale of his jutsu despite it already being a formidable size. Naruto could see the steam rolling towards him, but he knew the steam would be poisonous to his body. Not wanting to give Yuna an advantage, Naruto used his high level of wind manipulation to funnel the steam out of the immediate vicinity. Naruto could see that Yuna was still holding her hand sign despite how the intense flames of his jutsu destroyed it completely. Try and survive this, Naruto, because I really want my reward. Acid release. Return of the Emerald Dragon. Naruto arched an eyebrow at Yuna, wondering what she was doing, forgetting that he was standing in front of the crater he made earlier in the fight. The same dragon from earlier rose from the watery depths, using every liquid ounce to sustain its form before barreling into Naruto's unguarded back, getting the Sharingan-wielding shinobi to growl in pain as he felt the acidic qualities of the jutsu start to burn through the Chanmesh he wore, and in just a few moments. In the stands, Naruto-kun/Nissan was the simultaneous shout from Kushina, Narumi, and Naomi as they watched on in worry as Naruto's body was knocked forward from the acid release user's jutsu. Naomi clenched her fists, knowing just how dangerous that Yuna's moves could be after witnessing what they could do firsthand. They could see that both his vest and chain mesh were already being eaten through. They were glad, though, that Naruto's attire covered up pretty much all of his body. That is going to be painful. Why? Because I doubt even the most poisonous of the insect species could neutralize that acid. Shino added in with his own brand of logic that didn't do anything to calm down those worried for Naruto's safety, despite it being true. Kiba, who was seated next to Shino, grinned, seeing Naruto take another hit but kept his mouth shut so that Naomi or Narumi didn't hear him. The kid is in a tough spot. Asuma agreed with a small nod, wincing at the sight of Naruto's skin being burnt through by the greenish liquid. The sight even got the chain smoker to pause his nasty habit in favor of watching the intense battle between two obviously capable genin, soon to be Chunin. It looks bad, but don't count out that troublesome guy just yet. He always seems to have a backup plan, even if it doesn't look like he has a plan in the first place. Shikamaru surmised, confidently getting a nod from his best friend, who also knew just how clever Naruto could be. The rest of the genin didn't look as confident but watched to see if Naruto would prove the Nara genius right. Combat field. Kyuubi, can you stop that acid from getting any deeper into my body where it will be proved to be problematic? Naruto asked while glaring down Yuna, ignoring the searing pain that spread throughout the back of his body. He was already trying to layer a thin film of flames on the acid to burn it away, but it wasn't enough to stop the burning green liquid. Naruto realized just how truly deadly Yuna's jutsu could be with just a scratch. The Kyuubi, who was watching his container from behind his cage, gave a small snort when he heard Naruto's request for aid. Personally, the large chakra being saw no reason to help his container just because he got careless. Why would I help you? Just because you can't beat this human? The Kyuubi asked, seeing if he could get his container to get angry and maybe lose control of those emotions he kept so closely guarded and out of its realm of manipulation. Naruto had to stop himself from making his groan audible because it seemed that this time of all the times the Kyuubi had decided to be stubborn. Not having enough time to argue with his Biju, Naruto said the first thing that came to his mind. Fine then, when the world sees that the one tail has made further than the 9 tails and says that Shikaku is stronger, then you don't start complaining to me. Naruto retorted heatedly as he tried to think of another way to try and neutralize the acidic compound eating through his skin and soon to be eating through his bones and organs. The Kyuubi lay there in silence as he watched Naruto gnash his teeth, trying to figure out he could overcome the acidic liquid that latched to his body. Snarling behind the bars, the Kyuubi had made his decision. Fine, I will help you, you insolent whelp. However, if you get hit by any more of this acid, if you do, then even I will not be able to help you. The Kyuubi growled as his chakra began to heal the damage even faster than it could be done. Naruto let a small sigh come from his lips when he felt the Kyuubi's regenerative properties influencing his body. Naruto had to resist the urge to roll his eyes at how the Kyuubi seemed to manage to elevate his importance no matter what he said. Ending his series of signs with the tiger, Naruto's cheeks expanded slightly. Fire release. Phoenix Sage Fire. A series of 4 small fireballs were launched from Naruto's mouth, all targeting Yuna. Yuna scoffed at the feeble attempt at retaliation until she saw that Naruto was going through another quick, concise set of hand seals. Wind release, great breakthrough. A strong gust of wind roared from behind Naruto and hit the small fireballs. The fire technique, now enhanced by the wind technique, became one large wall of fire instead of 4 tiny flame spheres. Yuna's eyes went wide at the collaboration technique that was now threatening to engulf her if she didn't react. Not wanting to end up as a burnt shell of a human being, Yuna started up her counter technique. Water release, water encampment wall. Yuna shouted out frantically, only breathing a sigh of relief when she heard the hiss of Naruto's fire release jutsu hitting the water wall, protecting her from the fiery onslaught. Waiting a few moments to ensure that the fire was put out, Yuna then dropped the water wall. Yuna could see that Naruto continued to watch her keenly as she tried to hide her exhaustion from his prying eyes. Naruto, meanwhile, was having a small yet scolding talk with himself as Yuna glared competitively at him. If I knew any of the more powerful techniques for my lightning release, then her water release wouldn't be such a problem. I need to ask Mikoto-chan for some training after this. 3 Kage Bunshin formed in front of Naruto and exploded forward at the flat-footed Yuna. 1 clone took each side, forcing Yuna to create spears of water to dispose of them, leaving her open to the final clone's frontal assault. Knocking her into the air and getting her eyes to shut for a moment from the pain, the shadow clone reappeared above her, getting her focus back on it. Bringing her guard up, Yuna waited for an attack that didn't come. Yuna was broken from her confusion when she felt a sharp pain coming from her back. Naruto stood underneath of the falling Yuna with his fist pointed upwards, but to the eyes of the Chunin-level shinobi, they could see Naruto emitting a constant stream of wind that was drilling into Yuna's back. Naruto cut the wind current, making Yuna resume her fall. Waiting for Yuna to almost hit the ground, Naruto timed his kick so that it smashed into her ribs just before she hit the ground. Yuna groaned in pain as her body was sent rolling across the ground from Naruto's strong, swift kick. Panting heavily, Yuna got back to her feet, but Naruto could see that her stance was shaky at best. I won't lose to him. Not after I have made so much progress. Yuna shouted at herself, desperate to call on her dwindling amount of chakra. In her sluggish haste, her hand signs became sloppy and slow. Naruto saw this and decided that it was time to end this skirmish since he still had a crazed Tanuki to deal with. Naruto pushed off his feet and shot towards Yuna, who just got to her last sign. However, before she was allowed to use her jutsu, Naruto was on her with his left arm surrounded in a shroud of wind. Just as the outstretched arm hit her neck, Naruto curled his arm around it while he stood behind her. Don't act like this is a glory or death mission, Yuna. You fought well but ran into someone with more chakra. Besides, you still want that date, right? Naruto whispered into her ear with a small smile as his Fujin no Yoroi flickered around his body. Yuna, who was the only one who heard his words, nodded slightly before slumping back against Naruto, unconscious. Naruto eased the pressure around her neck and cut off his armor of the wind god. Thankfully, Yuna gave up right away, or else Naruto would have had to cut off the air to both of their bodies. Naruto waited for the medics to make their way towards them before he laid Yuna across the gurney. Taking note of Yuna's small smile, Naruto chuckled. Winner of the semi-final match by knockout, Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki. Naruto ignored the proctor and the subsequent cheers from the crowd as he walked back towards the wall where Twilight was stuck to. With the chakra gone, he found his katana lying in a puddle. Picking it up and flourishing the water from the blade, Naruto walked back to the center of the field where Gaara was already waiting for him with his perpetual glare of a gaze. I have dealt with that annoying acid from your last opponent. As we agreed, you are on your own against that damn Tanuki. You better not lose, because I will not permit myself to have a weak container. Naruto ignored the prideful and stubborn ramblings from his furry fox demon in favor of staring down Gaara with his Sharingan. Naruto could feel the unease that was rolling off of Gaara's person. It was almost like the auburn-haired Jinchuriki was conflicted due to the prospect of a fight. I got it, Kyuubi. Just do whatever it is you do when you aren't helping me out with something. Naruto said casually before cutting the mental link just before the Kyuubi could get in a prideful shout that would most certainly end with an insult directed at him. Kage Booth, your son has quite an impressive amount of control over the elements of fire and wind, that it could be even considered Jounin level. Inoki complimented Minato begrudgingly since it was pointless to deny just how impressive of a performance Naruto had put together on the field below. Minato smiled slightly while nodding his head subtly. Yes, Naruto has shown a great amount of promise, just like Yuna had done with her Kekii Genkai. Just seeing the damage it could do is truly terrifying. Minato's personality made it much easier for him to return the compliment of another village's shinobi. Though he was very proud to see how far his son had come, yet there was the twinge of guilt in his heart knowing that he had done it without his help. All because of a foolish mistake. Yes, your son has put on a truly impressive display. However, he is now going to fight my son who has had plenty of time to recover. I can't see how he could defeat Gaara. The Kazekage intoned with a small frown on his face, making it easy to think that he was disappointed by the outcome thus far. That's because your boy is the perfect shinobi, isn't that right, Kazekage Dano? I asked with a small smirk as he looked over to the serious-looking man who only shot the lightning shadow a momentary glance before closing his eyes and leaning back into his seat. After a moment, he opened his eyes and watched Naruto and Gaara continue their standoff. Believe what you will. I was merely stating facts. The Kazekage retorted, doing his best to not voice any of the agitation he was feeling. He knew that was what the Raikage was fishing for, and he would not be the one to give it to him. The Raikage scoffed at the very political answer that the Wind Shadow had given. This was the time that the Mizukage cut in, hoping to stem off yet another petty dispute between the Kage. While that may be true, Kazekage Dano, I still hope that Naruto will put on a wonderful display for the finals. Mei said confidently with a pleasant smile on her face when the two bickering Kage ceased their dispute. I certainly hope so, Mizukage Dano. I believe in him. Minato said with a larger smile as he waited to see what his son would do next. Each of his matches and brought some form of interesting outcomes that weren't expected, and Minato saw no reason to believe this would be any different. Combat field. Mother wants your blood, Uzumaki. Gaara informed Naruto with his usual gravelly voice as he continued to stare down his raven-haired opponent. A moment later, the sand that was contained inside of the auburn-haired shinobi's gourd roared from its place of containment. Naruto's Sharingan started to work furiously as he tried to discern the anomaly that was Gaara's first line of defense. Naruto's red eyes started to look for differences between the chakra sources around Gaara. All three of them. Naruto's lips curled up into a slight smirk as he figured something out, but that would come later. Well, there is quite the line for my blood. Naruto mused to himself with an almost bitter chuckle, getting a humorous caw from Suisei through the soul link. Naruto made sure that Suisei was on top of the stadium and away from Gaara, who was no doubt the biggest threat this tournament could produce. Naruto knocked himself out of his self-indulgence so he could focus on Gaara, who seemed to wait for him to respond. Naruto blew the low-hanging bang out of his face and gave Gaara a wry look. You are most certainly welcome to try. Gaara did not seem very amused by Naruto's flippant attitude towards his ominous demand, and neither was his mother. The sand began to clump in front of the one-tailed Jinchuriki right before everyone's eyes. Sand drizzle. Gaara, with his arms still furled over his chest, watched as the thick clusters of sand trounced towards the Hokage's son. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment before going through a series of hand signs and puffing out his chest. Opening his mouth, Naruto fired a series of small fireballs at the sand clusters, destroying them in the resulting small-scale explosions. Naruto created a shadow clone, and the two began to go through their own hand seals separately, with the original finishing before his clone. Fire release, grand fireball. From Naruto's mouth came a modest fireball that traveled towards Gaara, who looked disinterested at the feeble attempt to harm him. Wind release, whirlwind fist. The wind jutsu then fed into the fiery ball, making it expand mid-flight. Gaara, who now registered Naruto's two jutsu that worked in collaboration as a threat, used his sand to create a wall to defend himself from the searing combination. Unseen to the rest of the living population in area, Gaara grit his teeth as his sand held firm against Naruto's attempt. Breaking through the fire, Gaara's sand swarmed Naruto, who was forced to quickly substitute himself with a log or suffer the crushing demise that his substitution log had just suffered. The sand didn't even spare a moment as it flung itself at Naruto, who was forced to backpedal away from the persistent sand. Reaching past Twilight, which hung on his hip, Naruto gripped a handful of kunai and tossed them towards the motionless Gaara, but found himself to be frowning when the sand that was attacking him caught the kunai before they could get anywhere near his opponent. The sand sprung upwards and was moments from crashing down on Naruto when he cocked his fist back. A large amount of wind began to rush and whip around Naruto's fist as he harnessed the energy. Just as the sand began to start to fall towards him, Naruto thrusted his fist out and watched as the wind ripped through the sand and hit Gaara in the chin, making his head snap back from the force of the attack. The sand froze mid-motion before it rushed back towards Gaara to resume its defense of the Tsunade Jinchuriki. Naruto noticed how ready the sand was to return to Gaara's defense, and it verified his belief in his earlier hypothesis. Gaara could feel the pain on his cheek from the blunt but effective wind-enhanced strike thrown by Naruto. He was not using his usual sand armor because the fight earlier in the day with Uchiha took a surprising amount out of Gaara, and fixing then applying the armor would be very chakra taxing. Now his blood was boiling as Naruto threatened to end his existence, something he would not give anyone the pleasure of doing. Meanwhile, Shikaku was ranting on how Gaara needed to kill Naruto and take his blood. The One-Tail's hatred for the Nine-Tails coming through, not that Gaara knew that was the reason for his mother's livid behavior. No. I refuse to forfeit my existence to you. I will kill you, and then your blood will saturate my sand Uzumaki. Gaara roared with anger and rage, filling his usually void eyes as his sand began to stir violently around him. Naruto remained calm as he decided to try something invasive. Who is telling you that I wish to kill you? Who is telling you to take my blood, Gaara? Naruto asked with a calm tone as his Sharingan bore straight into Gaara, who returned the stare with a menacing glare of his own. Naruto knew the look, a look of hatred directed at those who saw he and apparently Gaara as less than the dirt they walked on. Gaara paused momentarily from his bloodlust-induced frenzy and regarded Naruto with curiosity as he registered the two questions Naruto offered. My mother is the one who wants you to die so I may prove that I am alive with your blood. Gaara's slightly murderous answer was given in a calm voice, showing he saw no problems with it. Naruto nodded his head slowly as he continued to look at Gaara with no emotion on his face as he took in those words. Tell me of the woman who gave birth to you, Gaara. Naruto waited patiently for Gaara to give him an answer while the crowd wondered just what was going on in Naruto's mind, Kage included. I am not sure. She died during my birth. Gaara answered truthfully as he wondered just where Naruto was going with this. Gaara even tuned out Shikaku's urgings to finish the job he started. Naruto nodded his head, taking Gaara's answer for what it was. The truth. Naruto figured that there was more to it than that, but didn't verbalize that suspicion. Gaara, do you know what these eyes of mine can see? Naruto asked while tapping his temple, getting Gaara to shake his head negatively. My eyes can see a chakra signature in the sand from your gourd. The chakra signature is very, and I do mean very, similar to your own. I believe that the mother you speak of is the one-tailed tanuki, Shikaku. Shikaku, the reason you are seen as an abomination by the people of your village, much like I am by the fools that live here. That sand that protects you is not the one-tail's doing it, is the will of your biological mother ingrained in the chakra that protects you. And from what I have seen, it will act to protect you without any effort on your part, but to attack you need to ask it to. After all, a mother will always protect their child while wishing it to stay away from violence. The stadium all paid rapt attention to Naruto's small explanation behind Gaara's sand shield, leaving Temari and Kankuro jaws hanging while the Kazekage wondered just how much Naruto's eyes could see. Gaara, who listened attentively, was reminded of something his uncle had told him on the night he passed away after trying to assassinate him. I can never love something like you, Gaara, because you took my sister away. However, my sister will always love you because you are her son and she your mother. That's love. Gaara, hearing Naruto's words, started to connect the dots that Naruto put in a line for him, while remembering his uncle's words of the past. The situation created a powder keg of emotions inside of the unstable boy. Gripping the sides of his head and shouting no, Gaara found himself in search of answers. Come to me, Gaara. I will save you from the pain of this world. I will accept you. Shikaku manipulated his voice to that of a woman who was caring and loving. Hearing the soothing voice, Gaara nodded stiffly, and soon his sand formed into a solid cocoon around him. An eye formed from the sand and glared at Naruto. Naruto glanced at the eye as did the rest of the people in the arena before returning his eyes towards the egg-shaped sand dome that concealed Gaara from the world. Naruto arched an eyebrow at the strange tactic. I hope he doesn't expect me to just watch him power himself up, Naruto murmured to himself as he went through 3 hand signs and brought his hand up to his mouth. Wind release. Drilling air bullets. 3 bullets of wind shot from Naruto's open mouth and ripped right through the sand defense like a flimsy piece of paper, sending Gaara out the back of the sand dome. Gaara got back onto his feet after being blasted by the air-based attack with his shoulder bleeding from Naruto's last attack. Gaara glared at Naruto, but his eyes were no longer pale and void but black with golden cross pupils. The black rings around his eyes were much darker now, and he had tanuki ears coming from his hair. Do not underestimate my desire to live. I will be alone in the world I create. The blood-chilling scream sent shivers down the genin who were former competitors, while looks of concern passed across the faces of every shinobi in the stadium. Naruto, for the first time in the tournament, visibly recoiled from the desperation in Gaara's voice. Throwing his arms out, Gaara's gourd of sand dropped off his back and pooled around his feet, rising past his knees. Naruto was forced to leap onto a wall as sand flooded the area around Gaara, coming from each corner of the stadium. The sand quickly spun violently until it formed a tower that easily surpassed the stadium in height. After a few tense minutes, Naruto's expression quickly shifted to disbelief and shock as a figure started to crawl from the tower of sand. It can't be, he is. A bulky arm came from the wall of sand near Gaara's body, which was floating in the center of the sand tower, still visible. A head soon followed the emerging arm, marked with a strange pattern decorating both the arm and head. The head quickly had grown ears, a jagged mouth, and the same eyes that Gaara was currently displaying. The sight of a half-formed Shikaku roaring out, shaking the stadium, froze civilian and shinobi alike. The amount of blood lust the creature was giving off was enough that someone could drown in it. The children in the audience were all shaking in fear at the sight of the sand monster. Flexing the claw at the end of its lone appendage, the Shikaku gave a menacing grin as its stomach and upper body became stable out of the grains of sand. Gaara glared down at Naruto as his mother made her appearance behind Gaara like a spirit materializing behind its avatar. Naruto could see that both Biju and Jinchuriki had eyes that were glazed over in a state of semi-consciousness. You gave up a mother's love and protection for the power of a monster that wishes to control you. Then I will be your eyes, Gaara. Kage Booth. I sprung to his feet as he stared at the looming figure of the spirit of the desert, ready to jump down at a moment's notice. While not in Kumo, I still had the instincts of a village leader when a calamity struck, and that was to save as many people as possible. Mei's hands clenched around the arms of her chair. She glanced at the half-formed Biju that rose above the arena, casting an ominous shadow over the area. The Terumi woman still had a healthy fear of the beasts after having to deal with the Sanbai on the occasions that Yagura let it take charge during skirmishes on the battlefield. Mei too sprung to her feet with Inoki as the head of Shikaku looked around the arena. The Ichibi. Minato's eyes hardened as he stared down the beast that was looking at his village with too much curiosity. Silently, he was forming a plan of attack in case the one-tail broke out of the containment of the arena where it would run rampant in the village. The only Kage who was entirely calm despite Shikaku's appearance was the Kazekage, Gaara's father. The Wind Shadow could see that this was the partial takeover and took a heavy sigh as he thought to himself. That boy was able to stop Gaara just before he could give the reins to Shikaku. Gaara is in control, but will he show control? Combat field. Naruto dropped back onto the ground and looked at the large demon that was now fighting with his opponent against him. I have to fight a Biju now? This is just fantastic. I am going to need something with a lot of firepower to put that thing down. Naruto groaned, which proved to be the wrong thing to do because thanks to the sound the Ichibi found him and snarled at him, making Naruto scowl. He was hoping to be able to come up with a plan, but apparently he wouldn't be able to do so. Lifting its one arm up, Shikaku glared down at Naruto. Ninjen, I know I said I wouldn't help you, but you need to move and put down that runt before he is given complete control. The Kyuubi ordered Naruto, having started to pay attention once he had felt Shikaku's familiar chakra spike. While Shikaku was the weakest of the tailed beasts, he was still a tailed beast. Dai Uzumaki. Let me see your blood. Wind release. Drilling air bullet. Unlike when Naruto used the jutsu, Shikaku slammed his arm into his gut, creating the same jutsu, yet his was much larger and faster. Naruto saw the fierce gale of wind ripping through the field as it approached him, showing that maybe speed was genetic as he sped away from where he was standing, avoiding the Tanuki's first strike. Naruto was forced to get closer to the large sand monster as it continued spitting tornado force winds at him. Reaching out with his massive claw, Shikaku swiped at Naruto, making the raven-haired shinobi leap aside in a hasty retreat. The ground was left with 3 scars cutting deep into the soil like shallow canyons. Shikaku let out a dark chuckle as he watched Naruto continue to run away from him like the insignificant rat he was perceived as. Jumping on the back of the massive Tanuki's palm, Naruto was flung high into the air when it ripped its claw from the earth. Naruto now, even with the Tanuki's face, took a deep breath before exhaling. Wind release. Drilling air bullets. Naruto shouted as 2 spheres of wind slammed into each of Shikaku's eyes, making the monster cry out in annoyance. Acting on instinct, Shikaku flicked his arm out as defensive mechanism for his temporary blindness. Naruto had no chance to dodge while in midair and was sent careening into the few trees that were left. Naruto cried out in pain as he felt his shoulder dislocate and his arm break when he landed on the ground. Naruto willed himself back to his feet and glared at the monster that was gripping its face in annoyance. The raven-haired crow summoner had to admit that Shikaku was very sturdy. Naruto began to do seals with one hand but was forced to repeat the process to do the jutsu properly. Fire release. Majestic Flame Destroyer. Naruto exhaled, shooting a wide wall of flames towards Shikaku. Unfortunately for the Sharingan wielder, the sand demon had just regained his vision and laughed at the measly jutsu Naruto had used, at least in the sand spirit's perspective. Naruto's body slumped forward as he watched his best fire jutsu flood the air and travel towards the Tanuki's face. Naruto, though, heard the laughing of his opponent's tenant and knew that it would not be enough. Haha! I love watching how worms try and cling to their miserable existences. Wind release. Seldom sandstorm. The one tail blew out a long breath that contained particles of sand within the devastating gust. The earth particles in the fire easily swallowed up the impressive fire attack like it was a dying ember. Naruto tried to brace himself with his one good arm as the wind picked him up and deposited him into the wall. Naruto pried himself from the wall and dropped onto his feet with a pained groan, his head bleeding and an arm hanging limp at his side. I'm almost out of chakra and this guy is just getting stronger, Naruto thought with a hint of desperation as Shikaku continued to laugh, obviously not seeing Naruto as any kind of threat. I have to try that. Naruto got to his feet and created a Kage Bunshin to assist him in with his next move. Naruto slowly built a sphere of wind in his palm that soon started to twist faster as it gained speed. Naruto grit his teeth as he tried his best to keep the shape of the vacuum sphere with only one hand. The sphere floated out into the air just in front of Naruto, where soon a ball of flames hit the sphere, courtesy of a clone. But the flames and sphere didn't explode, instead a supercharged flame was created in spherical form. Now for the last touch, Naruto told himself, panting heavily as some blood dripped into his mouth. Positioning his pointer and middle fingers so that they were aimed at the self-containing fire sphere, Naruto released a small bolt of lightning that fused easily with the sphere of fire. A cackling was heard when the lightning coursed around the sphere, getting Shikaku to stop laughing at look at the attack, as was the rest of the arena. The air that sphere manipulated around it carried the massive bomb towards Gaara. Shikaku, who was too busy dealing with curiosity, realized what was happening and curled his body around Gaara, trying to save his container from death, while believing he could handle the worm's jutsu. Please finish this. Collaboration technique. Judgment of the Scorned. Naruto limped towards the edge of the arena and braced himself for the inevitable impact of what would be his last attack, one way or the other. The next second, a truly massive explosion shook the entire stadium and the blocks around it, with the tremor rivaled by a massive shift in the Earth's core when the sphere of fire and lightning-enhanced wind expanded, releasing all of the energy stored in the technique at once. The only sound that could describe what was heard would be the sound of thunder accompanying a lightning bolt. The people in stands cried out in shock when the strength of the shockwave picked some of them up from their seats. Even the Kage had to use a startling amount of chakra to brace themselves from the force of Naruto's technique. No one in the arena could see a thing as a bright light blinded everyone in the arena after the jutsu's detonation. It took a few minutes for the light to fade and return visibility to the arena as a wind blew away the dust that was kicked into the air from the explosion. The arena looked on in awe as the once full field was reduced to nothing more than one large, smoldering crater. The only places that were unaffected were the fringes of the field where Naruto and the proctors were standing. Knowing the events of his jutsu were done with Naruto dropped into the crater. That wasn't even its full potential. If I had both arms, then I could have made the vacuum sphere more refined and more powerful. Naruto got to the center of the crater where Gaara's unconscious body was lying. Trying to get close to his fellow container, a wave of sand was what greeted him. I was just checking on him. I have no plans to harm your son any further. It is impressive what a mother's love can stand, and that includes death, Naruto said, looking at the sand that still floated around Gaara like a veil. Naruto ignored that he was called the winner and he was being lavished with cheers. Gaara, you have love from a mother, even while she is dead, while I was given nothing. Naruto muttered bitterly as his body started to shut down. Just when he thought he would collapse on the ground, Naruto was caught by the sand that was protecting Gaara and was lowered to the ground. Naruto could feel an odd warmth coming from the sand, and just before he went unconscious, he could have sworn he heard a woman's voice. You're not alone. A pair of bleary blue eyes opened up and blinked once, trying to find its bearings as they found themselves looking up at a white ceiling and a panel of light that was directly over them. Naruto tried to stir himself awake, but found that he could only move his left arm freely. Oh, that's right, I broke an arm against Gaara. Without thinking or really caring, Naruto released a tired sigh as he ran his free hand through his hair. Now, out of the slight daze one comes into after a period of slumber, Naruto could hear mumblings and one loud shout. He's awake! Naruto groaned in annoyance when he felt the weight of another person clinging onto half of his body. Naruto was relieved that the human projectile managed to keep away from his injured arm. Glancing down, Naruto could see the red hair of Naomi filling his vision and let a slight scowl play on his face. He still was not very fond of people touching him without his consent, even if it was Naomi and her emotional outbursts. Shifting around slightly, Naruto's eyebrow began to twitch in annoyance when he found that he couldn't free his arm from Naomi's vice-like grip. Get off of me! Naruto hissed at Naomi, getting the girl mentioned to tense up as she realized what she had done in the heat of the moment. Naomi quickly got off of Naruto with a sheepish grin as she rubbed the back of her neck. Naruto let out another sigh as he found himself too tired to even be angry at his emotion-ruled sister. Naruto took the moment to glance around and saw that not only was Naomi present, but so was Narumi, Kushina, and Minato, his family. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment, knowing that he had no choice but to deal with them, seeing as he was clearly hospitalized. Sitting up, Naruto watched as his other sister walked over to the side of his bed wearing a small smile. How are you, Naruto-kun? Narumi asked, genuinely checking on who she thought to be a friend. Unlike the rest of her family, Narumi didn't believe she had the right to ask Naruto to consider her family, but she hoped they could be friends at the very least. Naruto gave Narumi a questioning glance, not understanding why she would be asking that. Narumi picked up on this and elaborated for Naruto's sake. You have been out for 3 days. Naruto's blue eyes widened momentarily at that piece of information, because the last time he had been out of commission for more than a day were the days he was trained by Mihawk, Itachi, and Mifune all in the same day. I have been better, Naruto said quietly, since it was quite obvious his arm was broken and in a cast while he was feeling drained in the chakra department. Narumi nodded her head, smiling at Naruto's answer, since he didn't try and shun or keep her out. What about the promotion ceremony? Naruto asked the room, looking for an answer. We decided to hold it a week after the finals. After the final display, the Kages and I decided it would be better to give everyone a cool-down period. You still have 4 days before the ceremony. Minato told Naruto what the rest of the genin had been told the day after exams minus he and Gaara. Naruto just nodded his head. It looks like you are following your Uzumaki genetics, and Naruto-kun? Already taking care of Biju? Kushina chided Naruto, hoping to make light of the rather tense last match that her son was forced to take part in. Naruto smirked at his mother, since he didn't mind being called an Uzumaki. Kushina's smile took a rather serious turn as she added on to her earlier statement. Naruto, what was that Fuinjutsu you used in your second match? Naruto looked at Kushina blankly, then he glanced at the Hokage with an equally blank stare that made him frown sadly. There will be a council meeting, will there not? Naruto asked, seemingly disregarding the entire question Kushina had asked. Minato looked surprised for a second before letting out a small chuckle. Yes, I have received a request to hold a council meeting the day after the promotion ceremony with regards to what you have revealed to the world during the exams. Minato informed everyone in the room with a small sigh, wondering what the old fools wanted this time. Silently, the blonde Hokage wondered why he let Hiruzen convince him to keep his advisors in their positions. That's what I thought. I will explain everything there since I do not feel like telling this story multiple times. Naruto said, looking back at Kushina, getting a nod from the Uzumaki woman. Naruto slumped back into his bed, looking back up at the ceiling with half-lidded eyes, showing just how tired he was. Now, if you don't mind, I still feel quite exhausted. The visitors all nodded their heads in understanding and bid Naruto their own form of goodbye before leaving the room. Naruto closed his eyes and almost immediately fell back into a comfortable sleep. Naruto opened his eyes yet again. This time, there was no annoying light welcoming him back to the world of the waking. Naruto looked out the window and saw that a crescent moon was high in the night sky. Naruto glanced to his left and saw a person that he did not earlier lying in a bed much like he was. It was his final opponent Gaara Sabaku, and he was looking right back at Naruto. "Why are you so strong?" Gaara asked Naruto. His voice was usually soft, almost like he was unsure about his own convictions. Naruto looked away from the auburn-haired boy and out into the moon's ethereal surface as he came up with his answer. Gaara watched as Naruto's blue eyes peered out at the moon, waiting for the words of the shinobi, had proven himself to be stronger than he was. Long ago I was told that a person becomes strong when they have something worth fighting for. Ever since that day I have fought to protect the idea of a village where I can live without having to worry about the hell that is isolation. To fight for the ones who saved me from that hell, even if they don't need me to protect them. Naruto spoke passionately as he continued to stare out at the moon. Something to protect. I don't think I can ever have something like that. Gaara spoke with regret filling his voice as he remembered the way he acted when he thought his way was the only one to become strong. He had walked over corpses instead of building bonds with the people he had come into contact with. You have a family, start with them. There is no need to complicate things, Gaara. Naruto spoke with a sagely wisdom, and in truth Gaara was almost like Naruto's student. Gaara took Naruto's words to heart and even nodded his head, getting Naruto to smile. If that is not enough, then I will fight for you and you can fight for me. We won't be alone, Naruto said, happily repeating the line that a woman had spoken to him before he went unconscious. Gaara's eyes expanded in surprise as he looked over to the grinning Naruto with a small smile of his own. Thank you, my friend. Sure thing, Gaara. Once again Naruto found himself staring up at the ceiling of his hospital room with an obvious disinterest. Naruto looked around the room where the only color that was present in bulk was white, which only reflected the light. Naruto silently wondered why they couldn't use a more muted color that would make it easier on the eyes of the patients, which included him for now. Going over a checklist that included a separated shoulder and a broken arm, Naruto was pleased that his chakra levels had stabilized. Naruto was sure that even with the advantage his eyes, he had no qualms about not having to battle with Biju for some time. He was just not ready. The fledgling shinobi knew that the demonic tanuki was not at full power, and he still tossed him around like a ragdoll. Then there were still 8 more of those creatures, each with more potential to utterly eradicate entire hidden villages out there. A sobering thought. There was no doubt many people would be impressed by Naruto's victory over the Ichibi. However, to Naruto's high standards, it wasn't worth it if he was hospitalized for 3 going on his 4 days. It was a blow to Naruto's pride more than anything else. I really hate hospitals, Naruto muttered with a small frown, using his voice as a way to release the frustration he was feeling about the situation as a whole. I find that is a sentiment shared by all young shinobi. Yet when you get older you will find hospitals as a blessing from Kami in disguise. Age often dampens the enthusiasm you youngsters possess. An elderly voice added in from the right side of the bed. Naruto knew the voice of his surrogate grandfather anywhere, but what surprised the young Uchiha was that the old man was able to get so close without him even noticing. Apparently the look Naruto was giving Hiruzen showed his disbelief, because it gave the elderly Sarutobi a reason to chortle at the expression adorned on Naruto's face. Naruto-kun, I am known as the god of shinobi for a reason. There is no need to be so surprised. I would have been more surprised if you had managed to sense me. Hiruzen spoke wearing a teasing grin as he reached behind him and came back with a red fruit. Apple? Hiruzen offered with a grandfatherly smile that made Naruto respond in kind. Naruto took the apple with his good hand and observed the apple for a few moments before chuckling, getting Hiruzen to arch an eyebrow. These are supposed to keep the doctors away, but I suppose it is too late for that, no? That piece of humor gave Hiruzen a good laugh, as well as Naruto bit into the flesh of the apple, putting some nourishment into his stomach. So, old man. Whatever Naruto was about to say was cut off as Hiruzen's hand blurred from vision and landed on the top of Naruto's head with a swift chop. Naruto's eyes scrunched close in pain as he gave a small cry of pain. Opening his eyes, Naruto glared at the former Hokage with his blue eyes both angry but joyful. What was that for? I always call you that. I know, Naruto-kun, it is just fun to be able to do that. Hiruzen said with another hearty laugh as Naruto gave a small mock scowl. Hiruzen just ignored Naruto's fake protest, getting Naruto to mumble affection insults about his age. Hiruzen, now done with having his small amount of fun, looked back at Naruto, giving him his full attention. Right? Well, as I was going to say, where were you, old man? I couldn't find you anywhere in the stands during the fights. Naruto asked of the former Fire Shadow, getting the Sarutobi clan head to nod since he was not present during the fighting, but he was able to see the replays and hear the buzz around the village. That's because I wasn't. I and a few other Sarutobi clan members, as my guards, were on a political mission to Kusagakure, where there have been some border tensions as of late. Hiruzen said after finishing his own apple, since he couldn't smoke in the hospital, seeing as it would be detrimental for a patient's health. Naruto nodded his head since Konoha had always tried to be peaceful, or so it was said, so it made sense to send a powerful shinobi to try and curb off the violence before it could truly begin. Putting away such dark matters for another time, I came upon an interesting piece of information saying that you had defeated Shikaku in the final fight of the exams. That is no small feat. Hiruzen spoke absent-mindedly while stroking his chin, but there was no small amount of pride in his voice. Naruto could feel his heart swell when he heard Hiruzen's indirect praise of his skills. Naruto remembered what Mihawk had told him about an inflated ego and decided to try and play what he had done as unimpressive, because he knew that it was luck that Shikaku wasn't fully out and about in the fight. Not really. I mean, the one tail wasn't even fully formed and it was still smacking me around like a child, Naruto admitted, clenching his fist around the bed sheet that laid over him. Hiruzen was looking out the window at the village but nodded his head, agreeing with Naruto's honest assessment, but he thought it would be for the best if he pointed out just how impressive it actually was. That may be true, but remember that you are only a genin, Naruto-kun, and for a genin to defeat a half-formed Biju is nothing to scoff at. Hiruzen praised the younger shinobi, getting Naruto to give him a vulpine grin. Then there is that explosion you set off in the center of the arena. Maybe that was a bit excessive, don't you think? Before Naruto could try and dispute the somewhat overwhelming praise, the door to his hospital room opened up and in stepped Shizune, holding a medical chart that she was going over. Bringing her eyes up, she let out a small gasp and bowed respectively to Hiruzen. I apologize, Hiruzen-sama, I was not aware you were seeing Naruto-san. Hiruzen laughed lightly while waving off the medic's apology, not all that bothered or concerned by her appearance. Nonsense, Shizune-chan, you are just doing your job. By all means, do what you came to do. Hiruzen stood up and moved to stand near the door as Shizune went to do a routine checkup on Naruto, who was clearly annoyed by this. This boy can use 3 chakra natures at such a tender age. That, accompanied with his Sharingan and defeat of Shikaku with time and the right hand, he can easily take the title of God of Shinobi from me. I can't think of a better shinobi to hand it to either. Taking a step back from the bed and holding the chart she brought with her to her chest, Shizune gave Naruto a warm smile. Everything checks out, Naruto-san. You are free to go when you are ready. Naruto nodded and looked around and saw that he had a set of clothing already folded up on a chair at the foot of the bed. Thank you for taking care of me, Shizune-san. Naruto thanked his caretaker politely since he never had any problems with the woman. Unlike her master, Shizune had always been kind towards him and helped him out whenever he and she were in the same place and he needed it. Shizune nodded and excused herself to go and return to her duties within the hospital. Well, Naruto-kun, why don't you get dressed and then we can go and get some ramen? Hiruzen said happily as he exited the room, already knowing Naruto would be wearing a large grin on his face. Naruto sighed happily when he found the couch in his home to be just as comfortable as it was before he had left it at the beginning of the Chunin exams. Making sure his recovering arm was not in any position to be harmed, Naruto allowed himself time to relax outside of the hospital setting. After taking a deep breath, Naruto allowed his eyes to close, and not a moment later, he felt an additional weight come down upon his head. Not even needing to open his eyes to know what was happening, Naruto smiled. "Hello, Suisei. It is good to see you." Suisei rustled around on top of Naruto's head, making sure to get as comfortable as possible within his raven-shaded hair. "Ah, finally you are out of that terrible place, Naruto-kun. I was so sick of having to wait out there." Naruto chuckled lightly at his partner's words, but was glad to hear he had someone waiting for him to return. Naruto could feel through the soul link just how happy Suisei was to have him back, and it was truly something he had come to cherish over the past month. Naruto knew he would never regret choosing Suisei to be the one he was bonded with. "Finally we get some time to relax. Sitting on your shoulder has nothing to resting on your head." Suisei chirped contently as she lounged on top of the Konoha shinobi's head without a care in the world. Naruto smiled wider, but then it took a small twist into a grin. "Is that all I am to you, Suisei? A glorified perch?" Naruto asked, feigning to be hurt by Suisei's words as he tried to keep a straight face. Suisei wasn't going to be perturbed by her partner's antics and instead just cawed, more or less telling Naruto to get over it. Naruto gave his partner a small laugh before he reached up and petted her with his knuckle gently as he eased into the comfort of his couch. It didn't take too long before Naruto found his breathing start to even out and rest coming to his tired body as Suisei did the same on top of the sleeping Uchiha's head. Naruto opened his eyes again, but this time he found only a lingering darkness. Confused by his new surroundings, Naruto flared his chakra, assuming he was under an illusion, but the darkness still lingered. The only added effect of using his chakra was that Naruto's Sharingan roared to life, the red seemingly glowing in the infinite darkness. Reaching up, Naruto also found that Suisei was not on his head. Naruto took a few steps in the direction he was facing, but there was still not a single sign indicating light was even existent. Growing more and more frustrated at the infinite amount of darkness, Naruto shouted into the distance. "What is this? This is what you see." A voice echoed across the infinite plane of darkness, getting Naruto to tense and immediately fall into a combat-ready stance. Naruto glanced around him, checking each direction for the source of the voice. Finding nothing, Naruto couldn't help but scowl at the situation he found himself in. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his body still ready to deal with any possible threat that dare appear before him. Swerving around when he could have sworn something brushed past him, Naruto glared at the darkness. "What do you mean this is what I see? I can see much more than a bunch of darkness," Naruto challenged, starting to lose his usual calm demeanor much quicker than he would normally. "There is the arrogance that plagues you. You have never truly seen the world, Naruto. You may have seen more than those around you, but you can't see it all." The voice returned with a scathing assessment of what Naruto was, getting the Kyuubi's pseudo-container to scowl deeper at the darkness. Naruto felt that assessment was so far from what the truth was about him. "Arrogance is what has sunken its fangs into Sasuke, not I, and there you go saying I can't see but my eyes are far from average." Naruto protested heatedly at seemingly nothing, but he felt as if he was being watched, evaluated. It irritated him that he was still in a helpless position after all he had done to get stronger. "That statement is inconsequential. You see just as much as you did, as when you were a child yearning for the attention of your family." The voice continued pushing on sensitive subjects, and the cold tone it used was not helping Naruto's dwindling patience either. Feeling his blood boil, Naruto glared ahead of him with his Sharingan revolving in each eye as a result of that anger. "Fire release! Grand Fireball!" Naruto shouted angrily as he fired a massive ball of fire out into the field of darkness, hoping to burn down the annoying voice that was questioning him and his being. Naruto watched as the fireball was swallowed up by the darkness like it never came to be in the first place, not even illuminating the darkness that filled the space around Naruto before being taken by the darkness. "Perhaps that isn't your fault, however. Maybe the people around you are to blame. A prime example as to what I am saying being your two senseis, Mihawk and Itachi. Where before the voice was directly addressing Naruto, no, it sounded as if it was making a simple, speculative statement. Naruto's body began to tremble with anger as the voice insulted two of his most precious people. I won't sit here and let you talk poorly about them. They saved me from that hell of a childhood. What would you know about any of that? You won't even show your face, coward. Naruto shouted, not able to take the bad-mouthing that was being dished out to his senseis, especially when they weren't present to defend themselves. I have nothing more to tell someone who isn't listening. Enjoy the darkness that clouds the world, and when you come back, maybe those eyes of yours will be clearer. The even voice said, dismissing Naruto, leaving him to his own thoughts. Naruto stood there demanding the voice return and give him a straight answer, but to no avail. Naruto shot up from the couch, his eyes opening in a hurry as he gasped for air after the experience he had just taken part in. A small bead of sweat made its way down the side of the young shinobi's temple as his breathing started to calm down. Looking around and finding himself back inside of his apartment complex, Naruto allowed himself to relax. Looking outside of the window, Naruto saw the sun was a little lower than it was earlier, but not ready to go down, not really giving him an accurate time frame for how long he was asleep. Slumped back into the couch, his muscles relaxing from their tense state, Naruto used his good hand to move the hanging bang from his eye. Naruto sighed softly as he looked out the window, thinking about what he had just experienced. Who was that, and why did he keep asking me what I can see? I can see things just fine. This world is corrupted and unjust. Naruto took a deep breath as images of his childhood threatened to flood his conscious. Naruto took twilight from its resting place next to him and rose up into the air, getting the sunlight to gleam off the metal, making it shine brilliantly. In the reflection on the metal, Naruto's eyes could be seen shifting from an azure blue to a bloody red. With his Sharingan spinning as he stared deeply into the metal, Naruto's hand tightened around the sword. I'll use my strength to fix those problems, at least in this village, and maybe on a grander scale. Naruto added in when he actually thought about the proposition of cleansing the corruption of the current system. Naruto cut the flow of his chakra to his eyes, letting the red recede back to his original blue eyes as he put twilight back where it was resting. Naruto stood up and went to the bathroom to wash up, which he found to be very difficult with one arm and hand. After the fiasco of trying to maintain his hygiene and getting dressed, Naruto walked back into the living room. Just as Naruto was about to sit down, there was a knock at the door to his compound. Naruto groaned silently as he glared at the door in annoyance. Please, not ANBU. Naruto pleaded mentally as he walked towards the door. With each step, his trepidation grew and grew. Placing his hand on the handle of the door that had the kanji for lock on it, Naruto plastered on his stoic look before opening the door to greet his visitor. Naruto arched an eyebrow at his visitor, curious to their reason for coming to see him, especially since he only wanted to rest at the moment. The person standing across from him was not an ANBU but his opponent for the semifinal match, Yuna. Of course, the raven-haired swordsman was curious to find out how she found out where he lived. Naruto stared at Yuna for a few more moments before speaking. It's nice to see you again, Yuna. May I ask how you found out where I live? Naruto asked, his voice not giving away any amusement or annoyance. Yuna averted her eyes from Naruto, since he made it seem like she was stalking him like a lost puppy. Smiling at Naruto, Yuna laughed slightly at Naruto's question in a way to put herself more at ease. Well, I bumped into this kid and he was talking about you and kind of gave away that you lived in this apartment. I think his name was Konohamaru, Yuna mused, cupping her chin with one of her hands, looking up into the sky. Naruto forced himself to bite back the curse that felt the need to come from his lips at this moment in time. I am going to have a nice long talk with that brat about keeping his mouth shut every now and then. Naruto thought in frustration, his hand clenching around the door frame, the action unseen by Yuna. I see. Well, what can I do for you today? Naruto asked, pulling the conversation back on track. Yuna blinked before looking at Naruto expectantly, making Naruto feel like he was forgetting something. The feeling only intensified when she put her hands on her hips and tilted her head ever so slightly to the left. What did you forget about the date already, Naruto? She asked with a cheeky grin that had Naruto narrow his eyes in thought. Actually, I did. Fighting a Biju and then being knocked out for the 3 days following will do that to a person. Not to mention that weird experience with that voice. Naruto looked to Yuna and could see that she was anything but amused by his very viable excuse. Did I mention the broken arm? Well, it is a good thing that we have two of those pesky arms, huh? Yuna said in obvious sarcasm, making Naruto frown. Before anything else was said, Yuna gripped Naruto's good arm and pulled him out of the door with a surprising amount of strength. Thankfully, the door shut when Naruto was pulled away and the kanji for locked glowed on the handle. Naruto and Yuna were walking down the streets of Konoha in silence, since neither really knew what to say to the other. The shaky start made Yuna wonder if she had made the wrong choice asking the teen next to her out to a date without getting to know him first. Naruto, who was looking straight ahead, ignored the respectful and fearful looks he was on the receiving end of. "Where are we going on this date, Yuna?" Naruto asked, since it seemed that Yuna had pretty much had everything planned out before coming to him, aside from his living arrangements. Yuna glanced at Naruto and saw that he was still looking straight ahead, which she quickly did as well. "Just this little place I passed on my way to your apartment. After all, I am not from this village, remember?" Naruto nodded his head, since it was true she was a foreign kunoichi in alien territory, so to speak. When the two young nin got to the small restaurant, they were given a small booth near the back of the restaurant away from the few patrons that were already eating their meals. The two waited in silence for their meals to arrive, which they did after a respectable amount of time. A few minutes into their meal, Yuna had enough of the silence and started off a small conversation with her date. Then just like that, the date went off without a hitch, with both parties engaging in a lively conversation. Yuna was laughing along with Naruto at the times that there were jokes shared. "Did you hear about the incident just before first match?" Yuna asked carefully as she treaded on possibly dangerous grounds. Naruto snorted, finding the thought that he should care about the ramblings of the hateful insects to be amusing at the very least. Yuna was just glad that she didn't offend Naruto in any way, knowing that some Jinchuriki could be sensitive about their social status. "I really don't care what those narrow-minded fools think or say about me. What do you think about Jinchuriki, Yuna?" Naruto asked, curious of the state of mind of someone from outside of the village hidden in the leaves. Yuna smiled and didn't even break eye contact with Naruto, telling the young Uchiha all he needed to know. "While I'll admit I don't know all that much about the Jinchuriki, that doesn't mean I fear them. In IWA, our Jinchuriki are much older than I and usually are only around when the village is in a time of crisis." Yuna admitted honestly in between bites of her food, getting Naruto to wonder what his life would be like had he possessed the experience and strength to be able to roam free. Naruto had something akin to approval in his blue eyes regarding what Yuna had just said about he and his fellow containers. The rest of the date passed with friendly conversation about their villages. The two genin didn't have to worry about village secrets or anything like that, since they were only genin. What they were speaking about was village life and what kind of things happened within a typical day inside of their villages. Then when Yuna scared him about his final jutsu, Naruto just chuckled and replied, "Trade secret," earning him a pout which he laughed harder at. Naruto decided to be the gentleman and pay for the meal, earning an amused smile from his female companion, which he ignored under a stoic facade. Naruto and Yuna made their way from the restaurant to the hotel where the IWA shinobi were staying until the promotion ceremony. Yuna informed Naruto as they walked that each village were taking lodging in different hotels to avoid tensions between the shinobi. Naruto nodded, since it would make sense to keep an international incident from happening on the streets of Konoha. Just as the two shinobi turned the corner, there was a loud, collective shout of "Look!" followed by a swarm of children. Yuna stepped to the side of the street when she saw the kids moving to surround her date, content to watch with a small smile. "Were you scared when you had to fight that huge monster?" A boy with black hair asked excitedly, giving Naruto a starry-eyed look of admiration. Naruto was at a loss for words. Never before had the young shinobi been the center of such feelings of respect and even admiration. A young girl wearing a red blouse flipped her brown hair like a whip and let out a small scoff when the boy finished talking, Naruto's lack of an answer giving her time to give her own on his behalf. "There is no way that Naruto-sama was scared. Did you see that huge jutsu he used to beat that ugly thing?" the girl asked the boy, slightly annoyed by how he portrayed Naruto. She turned back to Naruto with a small smile as she bowed her head. "Thank you for saving us, Naruto-sama." Naruto, now more collected after the sudden influx of admiration had flustered him, gave the small girl a warm smile. The girl looked up when she felt the weight of a hand resting on her head. She blushed when she saw the warm smile of Naruto. As a shinobi of this village, it is my job to protect you. Naruto's eyes panned from the girl to the rest of the group, listening intently to his words. All of you, the children who had gathered around the Chunin exam's winner, were all left speechless, as their small bodies were filled with a sense of awe for the shinobi in front of them. Naruto smiled at all of them, glad to see that the hatred of their elders had not infected their pure souls. I want to be just as strong as you are, Naruto-san, a boy with goggles declared, his small fists clenched determinedly. This exclamation got a round of nods from children in the group, earning a small smile from Naruto. Naruto could tell from the looks of the children that they were either first-year students or were a year from entering the ninja academy. Naruto shook his head softly as he smiled out at the children who were focusing on them. No, you all need to enjoy your childhood by spending time with your friends and family. You will get strong, but don't rush it. You'll have plenty of time to get strong, but now go have fun. Naruto ushered them off, getting the kids to run off with huge smiles on their faces. The brown-haired girl who had spoken stood there in front of Naruto for a few moments, just looking at him like he was a hero. This made him chuckle inwardly. After a few moments, she too grew a megawatt smile before bowing to him and running to catch up with the rest of the children. This is what a childhood should be. Naruto thought happily as he watched the children running around yelling and smiling. There was not a shred of animosity between any of the children, and all of them were having fun with the others. Yuna took her place next to Naruto again with a smile as she watched the children as well. That was unexpected, that you were so receptive to them. Yuna teased Naruto as they started to walk back towards the hotel where the Iwagakure shinobi were being housed. Naruto chuckled at the small but playful chime in his date's voice. It felt good to laugh and smile as much as he had done today. I am a sucker for children. They are so pure and innocent. They deserve to be happy and safe, and that's what I plan to do. Naruto spoke with conviction. He looked straight ahead, missing the approving look Yuna was giving him. The pair eventually arrived at the front of the hotel and stood to look at each other. I had fun today, Yuna said, rubbing the side of her arm a little bit awkwardly, since she really didn't know what to say today. Naruto, who was in the same boat, managed to keep his poise a little better than his female companion. This is the best time I have had in a while. I wouldn't mind doing it again if we are ever in the same place again. Naruto admitted, getting Yuna to beam in happiness while Naruto settled for a more subdued smile. It wasn't a lie either. While spending time with Hiruzen and Makoto was nice, it was different than hanging out with someone around his age. Yuna looked at Naruto for a few moments with a look that was far away, almost reminiscent, and it made Naruto wonder. Yuna acted boldly and crossed the distance separating she and Naruto with one full stride. Acting quickly, Yuna embraced Naruto softly, making sure to avoid aggravating his injury. Before Naruto could even decide if he was going to reciprocate, Yuna had pulled away and hurried into the hotel, hiding her blush from her date. Naruto stood there in front of the hotel with an owlish look in his eyes before he broke from his stupor and started to chuckle to himself. Naruto, now wearing a content smile, started the long walk back to his home. What a day! It was the day of the promotion ceremony, and the atmosphere all around Konoha was abuzz with anticipation and excitement. The judges had collected the tallies for each competitor of the exams, and the results were ready to be told. The Chunin exams had brought in record ratings all around the continent, but now it was time they came to an end. The reason being that job requests were put on a halt for the time so both village and customer could assess the new talent and adjust who they wished to hire accordingly. The ceremony was originally set to take place in a large ballroom, with the only people attending were those approved beforehand, but thanks to the popularity of the tournament, the people demanded to be able to see their favorites get promoted. Eventually, it was agreed to hold the ceremony back in the stadium, after it was repaired, of course. The crowd had filled the seats and looked down at the center of the arena, chatting happily. The crowd wasted no time in showering the arena with their adulation when the former competitors made their way to the center of the field. The staff of the tournament had them stand with their squads in a single file line across the field. With nothing to look at, each former competitor looked into the stands where shinobi and civilian alike were mixed and seated. Some genin reciprocated the crowd's love, while others showed nothing and stood at attention. Once the arrangement of the genin was handled, the former proctors of the exam called for the Kage to make their entrance onto the field. 5 of the strongest shinobi in the world, followed by their bodyguards, were given no small amount of praise from the crowd either. Each Kage responded to the praise with their own gesture of acknowledgement to the crowd. Each of you has performed well and should be proud of just how far you have come. We all hope that you have learned from any mistakes you have made during these exams. Judges who were present for the entirety of the exams have come up with a decision regarding each of your promotions, and that judgment is final. Genma nodded once. He got nods of acceptance from the genin across from them. Genma stepped away from the group of genin while the beautiful Mizukage took a step forward and looked at the 5 shinobi from her village that had made it this far. Hintao, while it is true that you fought an obviously superior opponent, you still did not show enough to secure a promotion. Mei told the boy, getting him to nod in understanding before bowing and taking a step back in line. Terra, your water release techniques were indeed impressive, and you had a brilliant idea to try and infuriate your opponent, but then you fell for the same trick and it has cost you dearly. Mei looked at the arm that was luckily reattached by Tsunade. With it clear that she wasn't going to receive a promotion, Terra took a step back. Kakugyo was the next to take a step forth. You showed tremendous skill with your Kekiai Genkai Kakugyo, yet you did not take your opponent seriously and finish her off when you had ample opportunity. This was your undoing in both the fight and in securing your promotion. Kakugyo grimaced at the stern words and looked slightly despondent, but melded back into line to be replaced by Haku. Haku, in your first fight you did well to use the elements around you to hide your true skills, like a true shinobi should. Then you used your separate elements to create an advantage over your opponent in the second round, who was formidable in their own right. I see no reason to not promote you, Mei said with a happy smile while handing over a Chunin vest to the Ice Princess, getting a radiant smile from the girl. Chojuro, your swordsmanship was come so far since you have started training in the art. Not only that, but you also showed excellent skill with your water release skill. Your precise strikes with the sword disable one of, and even though the abnormal ending of your second match, you have been promoted as well. The Tsuchikage stepped out next and looked straight at his granddaughter, getting her to gulp audibly. The Tsuchikage smirked slightly, seeing the discomfort that Kuratsuchi was displaying through body language. It is clear that you have shown both potential and capabilities expected to that of a Chunin, but you were too readily accepting of getting into a fist fight which ended in your loss. Hubris is something that can kill you, and if you became a Chunin, that would kill your team as well. You are not being promoted this time. Akatsuki, you have shown the drive to research your first opponent and use your month to the point where you rendered their most vital ability as useless. Not only that, but you had an impressive showing against a Jinchuriki. I don't even need to mention the jutsu you used in this assessment. Well done, my boy. Handing over the Chunin flack, the Tsuchikage glanced over to Yuna. Yuna, you by far have given the best performance out of the shinobi from our village. You displayed tremendous skill in the fields of nin and genjutsu. These skills helped you defeat the Nanabai Jinchuriki and take you to the semifinals. You have come very far since your time in the academy, and I can't be more proud. Anoki added with a large grin, giving his kunoichi her vest. Yuna took the vest and bowed deeply to her superior happiness radiating off her. The Reikage was next as he pushed out of the line of Kage to stand in front of his 4 shinobi that had competed in the exams and made it to the final tournament. Karui, while you showed that your skills with a blade are rapidly improving, you also let your opponent prepare a jutsu that could have very well killed you. No promotion. The hulking Reikage's gruff voice had Karui grimace visibly. Omoi, while you showed just as much progress with your sword as Karui, if not more, you happened to run into an opponent who was within the same specialty, just more advanced. Unfortunately, one fight can't get you a promotion. Work on your jutsu arsenal, and next semester I have no doubt you will get the promotion. Omoi nodded before getting back in line, where Samui stepped up next. Samui, you showed understanding of a situation by wasting time to figure out an opponent's weakness. Then you showed an excellent grasp of Rantun in your match with Haku, but ran into an obstacle in elemental disadvantage. If you train to overcome this, then the sky might be the limit. Yet you still have earned that promotion. Congratulations. Samui took her flack in her usual cool and calm grace before letting the Jinchuriki take her turn. Yujito, your taijutsu skill was far and above that expected of a Chunin while it was applied tactically. You displayed an excellent amount of control over your fire release, but also knew when it was time to retreat, a key factor for a Chunin. With a few months of service and a few completed missions as a team leader, you can make jounin as well. Very well done. Yujito took the vest with a smile as she mentally thanked Nibi for the praise but not before sneaking a glance at Naruto. The ever-stern Kazekage came to the front of the line next, staring down his 3 children with no emotion clear on his face. The 3 were already familiar with the scowl he always was wearing, so that was no giveaway. Kankuro, you had an unfortunate matchup that resulted in your defeat. Let this push you to find a way to deal with those who threaten you by getting in close. Turning his hard glare to his daughter, he continued with his assessment of his children. Temari, you showed excellent progress with your war fan, but you were defeated by a singular jutsu because you let your emotions rule you. You will not be promoted, but if you fix those problems, then you will secure the position. Staring down his youngest son, there were a few very tense moments between father and son. Eventually the Kazekage spoke. Gaara, your control over the powers of sand is outstanding, that much is clear. Your lack of control, though, is concerning, and is the overall reason you will not be promoted. Gaara nodded his head in understanding with an even stare which had the Kazekage note the change in his son. The Hokage came forth next and stood in front of Team 9, first looking at the 3 shinobi who were held back a year to be ready for this stage. Niji, you have shown you are truly gifted with your clan techniques, but that wasn't enough when battling with someone who showed an elemental talent. If you wish to continue this path, you must train harder. Lee, your skill with taijutsu could easily be on the level of a rookie jounin, but it lacks any direction. Without strategically planning out your attacks, you leave yourself vulnerable to someone who is able to counter your strength and speed. You need more thought in your fighting style if you wish to be a chunin. Tenten, while I have never seen anything like your weapon-based ninjutsu, it still is not enough to be promoted. You didn't show any tactical thinking. Your jutsu, while wide-reaching, was also avoidable as was displayed. Then when you ran into the wind element, your aim was thrown off and your skill was halved. You will not be promoted either. Minato turned to the Yamanaka heiress with an apologetic smile on his face, getting the girl to sigh. Ino, I don't think I need to go into reason why you will not be promoted, right? Minato asked, getting a nod from his subordinate. The fire shadow turned to Choji, who also nodded, telling his Kage that he didn't need an explanation either. Shikamaru, while it is said that you are lethargic and often unmotivated, you showed so much in these exams. You used one jutsu to basically defeat 2 opponents while only using the advantages of the elements provided by an outdoor stadium. Then when you forfeited to Chojuro because of your lack of chakra, it showed forward thinking and the ability to retreat. You have been promoted. Shikamaru took the vest while mumbling a troublesome, getting Minato to chuckle softly. Sakura, you fought a tough opponent, no doubt. It may have been smarter to forfeit, but you showed a fighting spirit and the super strength of our legendary medic, which are good building blocks for future exams. Keep up your training and then try your hand next time. Minato spoke kindly, getting the pink-haired girl to smile in appreciation. Turning his eyes to the Uchiha of Team 7, his face became much more strict. He still was not very happy that he tried to use an assassination jutsu on his son. Sasuke, you displayed excellent skill in the fire release, which is expected of an Uchiha. You also were able to wield an A-rank assassination jutsu. Sasuke's smirk grew tenfold as he made his assumptions. But you lost your first fight and have not shown enough to become a chunin. Sasuke scowled but said nothing to the much more powerful shinobi. Narumi, your control over water was plenty to put you past the chunin level. You also showed you are able to use the more obscure arts of the ninja world. You used an opponent's weakness to win a round without even having to fight them, saving yourself for the next round. You're being promoted, Narumi. Minato spoke to his daughter, clearly proud but also remaining professional. Naomi, you showed the ability to use an A-rank jutsu in the Rasengan, which at your age is no small accomplishment. Your wind affinity has also grown leaps and bounds along with your taijutsu. You knew when to cut your losses, and that too has earned you points towards the promotion. Congratulations. Minato looked to the last person to be addressed, the winner of the exams, and his wayward son with a smile that Naruto returned with a blank stare. Naruto, you by far were the dark horse of this competition. During the second stage, you were left to your own devices against full teams and you came out unscathed. Then, in the final stage, you were overlooked for those who seemed to be aces from each village. You showed unpredictability and an unbelievable amount strength to defeat a half-released Biju with a technique that showed you posses a tremendous amount of power within you. You are the winner of this tournament and a chunin. With a few months in the field, you will easily become a jounin. Well done. The crowd cheered for those that had secured the promotions, getting waves from the more active shinobi, while the others remained reserved. Once all of the adulation was given the crowd and shinobi began to funnel out of the stadium, Naruto was offered a dinner with his family, which he turned down in favor for checking on seeing if his arm had been repaired by the Kyuubi. Naruto was the last to leave from the main entrance, and just as he was about to turn to face the direction he needed to go, he was pulled in the opposite direction. Naruto blinked in surprise as he came eye to eye with the orange pools of the Nanabai Jinchuriki. Fu blushed when she realized just how close she and Naruto had gotten. Acting quickly, she took a step back. Fu looked at the Chunin flak jacket slung over Naruto's right shoulder and gave an approving nod. Naruto smiled at his fellow Jinchuriki, glad to see her after missing out on seeing her the past handful of days. "You got the promotion then? You wound me with those doubts, Fu-chan," Naruto exclaimed while clutching at his heart, playfully getting a small giggle from the mint-haired Kunoichi. "So did you get promoted? I didn't see you at the ceremony," Naruto asked good-naturedly as he leaned against the outside wall of the stadium casually. Fu waved off Naruto's concerns with an easy-going grin plastered on her tanned face. "This ceremony was only for those whose village leaders came here to Konoha, but yet I got a letter from the judges saying I was promoted. They also sent a letter to Taki." At the mention of her native village, Fu became uncharacteristically serious. "About you getting me out of the village, Naruto-kun." Naruto pushed off the wall and motioned for Fu to come closer so he could tell her his plan for her defection. "Well, you see, Fu-chan," Naruto whispered carefully into the ear of his fellow Jinchuriki. Somewhere in Tsuchi no Kuni, two figures were walking down a mountain path in the land of Earth. Their pace showed no sign of hurry, but each step was purposeful. The wind blew the ends of their black cloaks with red clouds on them around gently. On the heads of the two figures were straw hats that had streamers that shrouded their faces from the view of the world. Both cloaked figures seemed to be pleased with walking in silence, since neither had even tried to talk with other during the entirety of the silent walk. The cloaks they were wearing kept the slight tensing of their muscles underneath the cloak hidden. The cloaked figure on the left turned ever so slightly to look at their partner, who was walking casually, and in turn nodded subtly. The two figures leaped opposite directions just as a deep slash made its mark on the ground where they were just standing before leaping away. The hats blew off of their heads, revealing a man with long blonde hair, a scope, and a blue eye. The other man had short wavy blue hair and brown eyes. "What is this, the blonde-haired shinobi asked, ending with an unusual nasal grunt to punctuate his sentence. His partner didn't answer him, too busy staring at the man across from him. Mihawk and Itachi stood across from the two shinobi, looking at the dangerous shinobi across from them with guarded expressions. The tension between the four highly skilled shinobi could have been cut with a kunai. What are two S-rank shinobi doing here in the land of Earth, especially considering one of them is a missing nin from the village of Iwagakure? Mihawk asked sharply, not interested in any banter with the two shinobi across from him. The blonde shinobi looked across at Mihawk with an annoyed glare. There was a personality clash between the two that created an instant dislike for the formidable swordsman. "You know of us, do you? Leader Sama won't be pleased that people have gotten hold of that information, The scope-wearing shinobi said airily, not really even recognizing the two across from him as an immediate threat to his life. He was more worried about what his leader would do if he got angry. "That is one scary man, the IWA missing nin thought with a small shiver, thinking of his leader's eyes. Itachi, who had yet to activate his Sharingan, spoke up in place of his sensei at this time as he recalled some information he had drilled inside of his head. Looking at the blonde, Itachi started his recall. Deidara is an S-rank missing nin from Iwagakure, who worked under the Explosion Corps with IWA. He is wanted for an act of treason after blowing up crucial areas of IWA and escaping with a number of Iwa's Kenjutsu." Itachi ignored the proud, almost smug smile that Deidara was giving after having his feats listed off. Turning towards the shinobi with blue hair, Itachi began anew. "Kurento is an S-rank missing nin from Kirigakure, who left the village after the newest Mizukage was instated. Kurento is considered to be the 8th swordsman of the hidden mist thanks to his prodigal talent with swords of an unknown origin. Kurento has a high affinity for water that was comparable to Mizukage Yagura. He left the village after killing hundreds of shinobi and left the Kiri equivalent of the ANBU in shambles. Deidara turned to newly named Kurento with a low whistle, ignoring the two shinobi that stood across from him. Kurento ignored the whistle in favor for staring into the eyes of Mihawk. Man, Kurento-sama, I forget just how scary you are sometimes. Deidara said with a nod before turning back to face Itachi with a smirk. The blonde bomber's hands twitched with anticipation but didn't make a move towards the pouches on either of his hips. Not yet. Deidara was thrilled to be facing down the shinobi across from him. Your lapdog is well-informed, Mihawk. Kurento spoke sternly as he continued to glare into the hawk-like eyes of his fellow swordsman. Mihawk Dracule is the S-rank wandering shinobi who has not joined a village despite requests from every village in existence. He had legendary skills in Kenjutsu and is only a level short of being a Fuinjutsu master. Seals on his blade Yoru amplify his wind-based attacks. Kurento droned out the information known on Mihawk, getting the man's eyes to narrow on the blue-haired man. Mihawk knew that this was a very dangerous thing and that he would need to be careful with this man. Deidara, seeing that everyone was sharing information on the other, decided to join in on the party with his own contribution. Itachi Uchiha is an S-rank missing nin from the village hidden in the leaves. Said to be a once-in-a-generation talent even among the Uchiha. Left his village after massacring his clan in one night. Deidara's smirk grew once he saw the glare that Itachi was leveling him with. Deidara, we are putting the mission on hold. Take Itachi off somewhere away from here and take care of him. I have a feeling we won't be getting away without a fight. Kurento commanded while reaching into his Akatsuki cloak. Deidara, who already had his hands in his pouches, nodded an affirmative. Sure thing, Kurento-sama. Have fun. A large owl made of some form of white substance came from the former IWA explosive release user's hands. Hopping on top of the owl's head, Deidara motioned for the Uchiha to follow him, which he did since he was too dangerous for him to roam free. Pulling both of his hands from the back of his red clouded robes, Kurento was now armed with two ocean blue, curved scimitar blades. Where the blades curved, the metal turned to white like foam coming off of a wave. Mihawk Dracule, I will not stop until the blood that runs in your veins are covering my Namio Furu, Kurento growled out, holding the two scimitars in front of his chest in an X formation. Mihawk frowned as he tried to think how this man, maybe 5 years younger than him, could muster so much hate for him. Mihawk readied Yoru by pushing his chakra into the seals on his black blade, getting it to glow faintly with a green hue. Slashing the large blade, Mihawk sent a wave of power towards Kurento, but it was cut off by an X-shaped wave of blue energy coming from Kurento. Drips of water shot from the collision of the two attacks, surprising Mihawk with just how much the blade could alter the chakra. Prodigal talent indeed. To be able to completely alter his chakra to the element of water takes nothing short of exceptional control and determination that is impressive. Mihawk was forced to take a step back when the force of both of Kurento's scimitars slammed into his long sword. Kurento took a step back and slashed his Namio Furu in a coordinated combination that Mihawk countered by parrying one blade into the other, throwing the attack off base. Choking up on the black blade, Mihawk lashed out with a swift slash that put Kurento on the retreat to look for openings in Mihawk's impeccable stance. Growing frustrated by the lack of an opening, Kurento took one of his blades and threw it at Mihawk, whose eyes widened at the desperate and unexpected attack. Just when the blade was about to deflect off of Mihawk's sword, the blue scimitar's flight path was altered by a leash of water that was wrapped around the handle. The new flight of the path caught Mihawk off guard, and the blade cut through his coat and into his side. The first blood belonged to Kurento, who knew it and smirked. Mihawk looked at the blade that was coming back for a second strike and cut clean through the water leash, forcing the blade to fall back towards the ground. Kurento slid across the ground and in a fluid motion caught his blade and brought both up in a rising strike. Mihawk brought his weapon in a downward arc, forcing Kurento to stop his attack and catch Yoru between his two scimitars that were held in an X position. Gritting his teeth, Kurento used all of his upper body strength to keep Mihawk's sword from coming down on his face. When Kurento felt his arms buckle under the strength and leverage that Mihawk had, he knew he needed a quick way out. Kurento's cheeks bloomed out as his mouth expanded with water that he shot at the gut of Mihawk. However, Mihawk was already acting to counter the move with his own field of expertise. The seal on Mihawk's blade glowed a brilliant shade of green, which only caused it to stick out on the blade of black steel. The miniature-sized bullet of water hit the blade, but instead of exploding outward, it was absorbed into the blade. The seal, having done its job, faded away, leaving Mihawk staring at Kurento stoically, while Kurento was glaring sternly at Mihawk. Mihawk pushed his chakra into the amplifying seal on his blade, getting the entire steel weapon to glow green. Mihawk's power-up caught the attention of Kurento's, whose body visibly tensed in preparation for what was to come. I have underestimated your ability with your swords, and that has cost me a wound. That is to be expected of one who belongs to a group of S-ranked criminals, however, so I have only myself to blame for that. I will remember your name, Kurento. Goodbye. Mihawk spoke confidently as he slashed his sword at Kurento, sending a massive wave of wind-infused energy. Kurento growled at the elder swordsman for underestimating him. He would not fall here on a mountain in the land of Earth, that much was certain. Holding up his Nami o Furu over his head, particles of water formed around the blades until it stuck to them like a coating. I won't lose here. I won't lose to you. Shattering waves, slashing down his ocean blue scimitars, caused to massive waves to come roaring to life from the water gathering around the blades. The massive water attack came bearing down on the swift, contained wind-infused slash in a dramatic collision. Both parties watched as their attacks opposed the attack of their opponent. Higher up on the mountain near its peak, Itachi was looking up at chuckling Deidara, who was hovering just above the reach of his grand fireball. Itachi was adamant in believing that every jutsu has a weakness, but the aerial capabilities of the Mad Bomber were inconvenient. Itachi glared up into the eye of Deidara, had to fight the urge to smirk victoriously as he casted a genjutsu on the S-rank shinobi using his fabled Sharingan. Deidara continued on, oblivious to the state of altered perception he was placed in. Deidara buried his hands in the pouches on his sides and waited for the mouths on his palms to devour his clay. Taking an air of superiority, Deidara leered down at Itachi with a clear distaste in his blue eye, and his lips contorted into a smug smirk. Now, with all of the clay he needed, Deidara turned his palms to the ground where his hands started to regurgitate the white liquid. Itachi arched an eyebrow, not having seen the explosive release used in such a fashion. The shapeless glob of white started to spawn of creations of varying shapes and sizes. Where some looked like bulky soldiers, others looked lean and agile. There was even a creation that was simply a pair of feet with two beady black spaces for eyes. Taking a step back as he recoiled in surprise, Itachi glared deeply at the creations of his opponent, almost as if he was trying to cause them to combust. The small pair of clay feet leaped at Itachi, getting his eyes to widen in surprise. Itachi, who thankfully started wielding a blade after getting back with Mihawk, lashed out with his tanto, slicing through the clay creature. Itachi's red eyes followed the strands of clay that came from each creature and saw that they were connected to Deidara, who was presumably controlling them. How was he so close? I know the genjutsu I used was to keep him seeing the reverse of what he was doing. One of the larger creatures leaped towards Itachi, who wanted no part of the explosive artistic creation. Flashing through a series of hand signs in the blink of the eye, the Uchiha ended with the tiger sign. Fire release, grand fireball. The ball of flames hit the clay consort head on, resulting in a rattling explosion. Before Itachi could react, one of the more lean creatures speared through the cloud of debris and its chakra began to concentrate in one spot, the center. Itachi could hear the faint call of Katsu as he leapt away from the explosive just before it could self-destruct. Itachi came to a skidding halt with nothing more than a few dark, burn marks on his otherwise white cloak. Watching as the creatures swayed back and forth like a hypnotizing dance, Itachi looked up to his opponent with a questioning glance. Deidara started to laugh at Itachi's confusion, seeing that he had stumped the genius Uchiha. I trained myself to see through all form of Sharingan genjutsu after I had a run-in with one of your clansmen. He was pretty good with the Shunshin to him. Deidara added as an afterthought, unknowingly referencing Shursui, Itachi's best friend. Itachi had to take a deep breath to keep himself level-headed. I am glad that you managed to survive my C1. If you had bitten the dust with such low-level explosives, I would have found your defeat highly disappointing, Deidara admitted as the small C1 soldiers had formed back together into one ambiguous blob of liquefied clay. Soon the shapeless mass split into two and was shaped into twin clay dragons that took into the air in tandem and shot off for the Konoha missing Nin. Itachi quickly slipped past both of the larger projectiles, but then they turned back and came again. Itachi silently cursed the fact that they seemed to hone in on his presence. Deidara watched on with amusement as Itachi continued to try and dance his way through his beautiful creations, an act he saw to be futile. Deidara observed as Itachi slipped into a few trees that dotted the mountain's surface. There were a few minutes where the explosive virtuoso waited in silence on top of his owl until Itachi crept back into the clearing. The next moment, both dragons dive-bombed on Itachi from the sky and detonated right on top him. Deidara was left on watching with anticipation as the dust cleared, and when all that was left was a large crater from the explosive properties of the C2 dragons, he laughed. It looks like the almighty Itachi Uchiha was nothing more than a bunch of bullshit created by the people of Konoha. I should have known. Ha ha. Deidara continued to laugh as his owl started to make its way back down lower on the mountain to find Kurento. A glimpse picked up from the scope over his eye had Deidara leaping off the head of the owl on instinct, and just in time as Itachi's tanto was buried into the neck of the owl. Itachi, landing on its head, used his chakra and kicked it down, sending it spiraling down to land behind its master. Ho? So you survived the C2 as well, eh? Good, now you can taste my C3 creations and tell me what you think of my art. Deidara spoke gleefully as he moved to take some of the clay that created the owl from before. Itachi's body tensed as he prepared himself to face an even more destructive explosive from the former explosive's core member. Suddenly, before Deidara could go any further, Kurento dropped on the field right next to Deidara. He looked worse for wear, with cuts all over his cloak and blood dripping from his right shoulder. Quite badly too. Kurento-sama, what happened to you? Deidara asked, not having seen his partner ever look so beaten. Kurento grunted as he turned to face Deidara with a blank face, not giving off any of the pain he was feeling. The look in his eyes was there only for a moment, but there was a burning fury in his eyes. Deidara, we are going. Leader Sama has called us in. Kurento spoke sternly as he clasped a hand on his blonde partner's shoulders. Before Deidara could voice his opinion on the order, both shinobi disappeared in a cyclone of water, Kurento's hyper-powered version of a Mizu Shunshin, leaving Itachi standing in the field alone. Not a moment later, Mihawk dropped into the clearing with a small amount of cuts on his coat and pants, but not bleeding anywhere visible. Student and mentor looked at each other for the briefest of moments before nodding at the same time.